Coming in at number 10, we have the head of the demon, aka Ra's al Ghul. The leader of a criminal organization known as the League of Assassins, Ra's al Ghul is over 600 years old and dedicated to wiping out most of humanity in an effort to cleanse the planet of disease and pollution. The secret to his long life and the reason he earns a spot on this list is his mastery of the Lazarus Pits, mythical locations connected to ley lines that are capable of resurrecting the recently deceased and have kept Ra's al Ghul essentially immortal for over half a millennium. Combine that with the endless resources and followers that Ra's al Ghul has gained over the years, and you have quite the formidable villain. At number 9, we have Bane, the man who broke the bat. A brilliant warrior who was raised from childhood inside an island prison, Bane's most notable act was when he systematically weakened Batman's support system and eventually faced and bested him in single combat, shattering Bruce Wayne's spine over his knee. This victory over the Dark Knight was only temporary, but has still given Bane an intimidating reputation that he more than lives up to, going on to become a supervillain crime boss and always looking forward to another rematch where perhaps he can break more than just Batman's spine. Coming in at number 8, we've got to go with the super assassin Deathstroke. While in recent years the infamous Slade Wilson has become more well known for tormenting the Teen Titans, Deathstroke has also had many run-ins with the Justice League and the Dark Knight himself. With his brain operating at 9 times the efficiency of a normal human being, Deathstroke is exactly the type of opponent that pushes Batman to his physical limits with a complete mastery of every weapon at his disposal. Combine that with his Icon suit, which has been shown to even be able to withstand a punch from Superman, and this is a foe that Batman is always just barely able to outwit.
And at 7, Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. From what I could find being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his life with his actually good counterpart. However, the difference between the two was that at some point Aunt May also died, being buried next to Uncle Ben. But thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals, a version of the Carnage symbiote sensed Peter's anger and combined with him, turning him into Spider Carnage, a villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Peter Parker with the Carnage symbiote and then a desire to destroy reality, oh my god. However, he was ultimately defeated when the main series Peter brought the Uncle Ben from another universe to talk to Spider Carnage and actually brought him down and made him sacrifice himself to save all reality. Damn, I love this show, I really do. If you haven't seen it, it's on Disney+. Please watch it if you can, it's so good. And at 6, Morlun. First appearing in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2 number 30 in 2001, Morlun is one of the most influential Spider-Man villains of all time. Morlun is potentially the biggest threat Spider-Man has ever faced, even if he isn't the most powerful, since defeating him ended up requiring a whole multiverse of spider people, or as the comics were calling them, spider totems, to take him down. Coming from Earth 1, Morlun uses these spider totems to stay alive, feeding on their energy and casually just hopping around from universe to universe, squashing their spider person. This guy is the backbone of the Spider-Verse concept, and a load of spider totems had to team up in order to actually beat him, but not without massive casualties. So definitely a powerful villain that ended up losing overall, but maybe I guess he didn't lose since he did kill off multiple spider people before his actual defeat. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how he looks at defeat and what his definition of the term is, since some people could consider killing one person a success, so who knows?
Number 5. Invincible. Invincible, Mark Grayson, is an incredibly strong character. Being a Viltrumite, Invincible is a member of one of the most unbeatable species in the galaxy. Mark is also a young adult, who hasn't learned how to control himself or his powers completely, so it's interesting that one of his greatest enemies is an incredibly squishy man by the name of Angstrom Levy. That's because Angstrom is pretty intelligent and ruthless, but also because he has the ability to open portals to alternate realities. Using his knowledge of other dimensions, he was able to figure out the alter ego of Invincible and find out where Mark lives. He travels to Mark's home and then captures Mark's mom and brother. First of all, making things this personal never works out for a villain, so they need to stop doing that. But Angstrom does actually put Mark through a good old fight, using portals to send the hero to multiple different dimensions, which was really cool, honestly. Where Levy made a big mistake though was when Mark's mom, Debbie, decides to try and attack the villain using a lamp, smashing it over Levy's big old head. Levy didn't take too kindly to this little affront, and he broke Debbie's arm. Now In a fit of absolute blinding rage after seeing this, Mark charges full force at Levy and they end up crashing through multiple realities until they land in a sandy desert wasteland. Which is when this idiotic guy Levy decides to threaten Mark's family again. Invincible, still in this blind rage, uses all the strength he has, completely pummeling Levy until Mark looks like he's covered in ketchup and Angstrom is now a huge puddle. But somehow, he still comes back. Number 4, Conquest. Yes, we're still talking about Invincible. For the Viltrumites of this Invincible comic series, they have extremely high resistance to damage, but what makes them even more capable is that when they do get beat down, usually by another Viltrumite, and they survive the damage, once they heal up, they become even stronger than they were before. It's why the oldest Viltrumites are usually the most powerful of the bunch. Now, one old-timer Viltrumite goes by the name of Conquest, and he is one grizzled old man. Battle-scarred as hell with a cybernetic arm and psychotic as hell as well, he arrives on Earth to check on Mark's progress with taking over the planet. That's a whole long story, we don't need to get into it. Essentially, he arrives after Mark had just gone through some I can't say that. So Mark is not in the best mood, but Conquest does not care, and these two have an absolute slog of a battle over the course of 4 issues of the comic. It's insane. Conquest takes a few hits, sure, but Mark is no match for this guy in the slightest. In an attempt to help Invincible, his girl, Adam Eve, decides to show up on the battlefield and lend a hand, and she was far out of her league, but she's very powerful, didn't really matter. Conquest punched a hole right through her. This was the line that you just don't cross. It sends Mark into a frenzy. The two Superman-like beings fly straight at one another and Mark punches straight through Conquest's cybernetic arm, breaking his own arm in the process. He uses his unbroken hand to clock the old man in the face, he bites a massive chunk out of the guy's shoulder, Adam Eve revives herself out of nowhere, lends a helpful blast, and then when Conquest breaks Mark's other hand, this guy uses his head and headbutts Conquest over and over and over again. It was like 15 hits until what was once his head is now a stomped on can of crushed tomatoes. I don't know if we can even show this one, but it's just insane. Number 3, Squirrel Girl versus Dr. Doom. Look, we're talking comic books here, okay? Just keep that in mind. In Marvel Superheroes number 8 from 1992, in one corner, we've got the full, untested, unbridled powerhouse of Squirrel Girl. And then, in the other corner, we have the Fantastic Four's top enemy, the ruler of Latveria, the man who has wielded the power of the Beyonder, constantly blends incredible technology with powerful magic and artifacts, fueled by his massive, deserved ego. It's the one and only Dr. Victor Von Doom. Who's the winner? Obviously, it's Squirrel Girl, what the hell? Summoning a monstrous horde of squirrels that completely swarm Doom as he cries out, "My much vaunted technology decimated by these gnawing rodents." And he escapes through a trap door, diving into a river and leaving behind his mask, which Squirrel Girl takes as a trophy. Of all the defeats on this list, this one is definitely brutal. Completely tore that man's pride straight from him and sent him running and screaming with a whole cacophony of squirrels. Damn. That was kind of fun. Number 2, Mr. Dumpo. I know, I'm surprised the Punisher has not shown up on this list too, until now. Honestly, I can tell you why. The Punisher doesn't really have that many memorable villains because his whole thing is that he doesn't let them live. Usually his villains are gone from existence by the end of the issue, and definitely before the end of the series. And usually, he does it very quickly and very easily, but definitely not always. In the Punisher Volume 5, number 11, the Punisher is facing off against a guy called the Russian, who was hired by another bigger bad who we talk about just in a moment. When the two finally come face to face, the fight sees them tumble through Frank's apartment building, crashing into the apartment of Frank's neighbor, Mr. Dumpo. Mr. Dumpo is not the smallest man. In fact, I'd say he's quite large. Yeah, that's how I'd put it. Using a fresh out of the oven scalding hot slice of pizza belonging to Mr. Dumpo, Frank burns the Russian's face, and then Frank takes Mr. Dumpo and tosses him on top of the Russian and dogpiles on top, suffocating the Russian to his demise. Could you imagine going out like that? Just take a moment and think about it. That would be horrible. Number 1, Ma Gnocchi. That's how I'm gonna say it. I said we were about to talk about another Punisher villain, and I wasn't lying. Ma Nyochi, or Nyochi, or however you, tell me how you pronounce that in the comments below, just, I can't figure it out. She's the head of the Nyochi crime family, so yeah, she ain't really a nice lady. Now, before the moment I'm about to talk about, Frank had thought that he had already neutralized the threat of old Ma here, and that's because he literally fed her to a gaggle of polar bears. Now, while they didn't finish her off, the bears did happen to relieve Ma of her arms and legs. It was that action that prompted the hiring of the Russian at the last point. Now, in The Punisher Volume 5, number 12, after taking down about 80, yes 80 of her thugs, Punisher comes back to finish the job. 80 men were already obliterated, so no one was willing to lend the legless and armless head of crime a hand as Frank burned down her mansion. She put up a decent fight with no limbs though, sort of. After she attempted to gnaw his ankles off, unsurprisingly unsuccessfully, Frank uses his big old foot, plus the muscles in his leg, and not so gently places this helpless, horrible woman into the burning pyre that used to be her home. Cold. Or hot, actually, cause fire.
And at 10, Cupid. First appearing in Green Arrow and Black Canary number 15 from 2009, Carrie Cutter, also known as Cupid, is a deranged Green Arrow attempted mimic, even if she isn't really that good with a bow in the comics, and former Special Ops soldier. Cupid first showed up in Star City at a scene of one of the Green Arrow's fights. She picked up the broken tip of one of his arrows and carved the infamous heart with an arrow through it onto her chest. She then began killing off some of his notable enemies in the hope that she may begin to fulfill his heart's desire. And she killed the guy who cut her hair because she never wanted someone else to have hair that perfect. Yeah, Cupid is in essence Oliver's Joker in a way, since there is no Cupid without Green Arrow, and let's be honest, they're both absolutely nuts. The character did appear in the show, however was not nearly as crazy and quickly turned her affection to Deadshot after joining the Suicide Squad. Cupid being obsessed with Arrow was kind of like a 1 to 2 episode thing in the show. And at 9, Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia was introduced in Green Arrow number 12 from 2002 and was created by Kevin Smith and Phil Hester. Onomatopoeia first appears when he murders a female crime fighter named Virago, after telling her his name. The interlude in which this occurs serves as a lead into The Sounds of Violence, and is the main villain of a short storyline that runs from issues 13 to 15 of that Green Arrow run, which is called The Sounds of Violence. Just the sheer ridiculousness of this character is enough to earn him a spot on this list for me though. And the great thing is that this character only works in comic books unless you give him like superpowers. Saying bang in a cinematic setting only makes for an awkward moment after a real gunshot unless you saying bang actually makes a gunshot. Since in movies gunshots sound nothing like that and you can't really make that sound with your mouth. Onomatopoeia just talks in onomatopoeia, which is spelling out sounds like bang or crack or snap. And this character is something I really find interesting for this reason. Plus, this man looks like he's a guard from Squid Game with like his mask thing. Look, I wonder where Squid Game got the idea, and I think it was this guy. And at 8, Prometheus. Created by Grant Morrison and Arnie Jorgensen, the most recognized version of Prometheus made his first appearance in New Year's Evil Prometheus from 1998. Commonly an adversary of the Justice League, Prometheus would also serve as an enemy to Batman, Green Arrow, and Midnighter. Prometheus possesses no superhuman abilities, but has undergone intense physical and mental training and utilizes an extensive range of equipment and technology, just like Batman does. However, Prometheus is probably the most known in the Green Arrow community for being the start of the Trial of Green Arrow storyline, commonly known as the worst Green Arrow storyline of all time, where Oliver kills Prometheus after he bombs Star City, kills Roy's daughter, and cuts off Roy's arm, and then Oliver gets put on trial for murder. The character also appeared in the Arrowverse as Assistant District Attorney Adrian Chase, which some assumed was going to be revealed as Vigilante, but Adrian Chase just turned out to be an alias used by Justin Claiborne's son after plotting revenge after the Arrow killed his father off in off screen in season 1. Yeah. And at 7, Count Vertigo. Count Vertigo is the last descendant of the royal family that ruled over the small Eastern European country of Platlavia that was taken over by the Soviets and later became devastated by the Spectre. First introduced in World's Finest Comics number 251 from 1978, the original comic book version is much more interesting than his modernized TV show counterpart. Also, basically all of these characters have appeared on the show just because they're also some of the Green Arrow's most iconic villains, so I will be making comparisons. Count Vertigo first appeared in Star City, where he attempted to steal back the jewels his parents had to sell when they had escaped to England after the war. The victim of a hereditary inner ear defect that affects his balance, Vertigo has a small electronic device implanted into his right temple that compensated for this problem. Tinkering with the device, Vertigo learned that he was able to affect other people's balance as well, distorting their perceptions of what they would see, and basically they couldn't tell up from down, which he calls vertigo, even though vertigo is just the sensation of a room spinning when it's not, instead of like not knowing where you're going, whatever. But still, this is how he works in the comics, whereas on the TV show he was a dealer who made a substance known as vertigo that nearly gets Thea killed in a car accident because she was being dumb. Yet even though he's killed off in season 2, vertigo as a substance remains present throughout the rest of the show. I think it made its like final appearance in like season 6 though, but I'm not sure. And at 6, Konstantin Draken. First appearing in Green Arrow Volume 3, number 27 in 2003, Konstantin Draken is a short guy, much like myself prior to grade 11. As a child, he was teased for this by other children, but once he started killing people at the age of 10, he found that he was no longer sensitive about his stature, which I guess is understandable, because like why would you care if you're being made fun of if you could just kill them, right? I mean, it solves the problem. But when troll-like monsters began to terrorize the Elvast Corporation's construction sites, the company hired Draken to take care of it. However, he ran into the Green Arrow, who was also investigating the monsters. Draken was able to defeat Oliver, however he didn't kill him because he wasn't getting paid enough yet. He then seemed to act as if he was on retainer for Elvast, killing Black Lightning's niece because she discovered information that proved the troll monsters were actually created by Elvast through an imperfect vaccine side effect. Oh god, I can hear the comments now. In the TV show, Draken was Adam Hunt's head of security, and later on an assassin version of the character popped up played by a different actor. That was in season 3, and they thought that he had killed Sarah Lance, but I don't know if they intended for that to be the same character. On the wikis, they're like kind of interchangeable. It depends on who you ask. Halfway through into number 5, Brick. Brick is certainly an interesting guy. Daniel Brickwell was originally a low-level henchman or enforcer for various mobsters in Star City, and also ran his own street gang. However, he had a brilliant criminal mind and higher aspirations to go with it. We love a dreamer. In the wake of a demonic attack against Star City, he began to expand his gang's criminal activities, particularly illicit substances sales, and push them into areas left vacant by other criminal organizations. However, this guy also has a power, first being introduced in Green Arrow Volume 3, number 40 from 2004, Brick is literally made of brick. In essence, the DC version of the Thing, but a bad guy. Which is a stark counter to his Arrowverse counterpart, who was just a mob boss introduced in season 3, even though metahumans were introduced into the Arrowverse that season as well, because Flash season 1 had started at that point. They could have just put him in Star City and made him a brick, but oh well. In the comics though, Green Arrow challenged Brick to a duel over who owned Star City. He shot a glue arrow into the back of Brick's mouth, blocking his throat and suffocating him, but rather than allowing him to die, Green Arrow saved him, warning him that if he steps too far out of line again, next time he's gonna die. But since this incident, his interference with law enforcement and the political figures of Star City had either ceased or vastly subsided, which I have to say is a pretty sexy power move from Oliver. And at 4, Merlin. Long before becoming the vigilante Green Arrow, Oliver Queen was inspired to take up archery after hearing of the exploits of Arthur King, otherwise known as Merlin the Magician, a master archer with acute accuracy. Years later, Merlin challenged the Green Arrow to a public archery duel and defeated Oliver. With that victory under his belt, Merlin vanished for years before resurfacing as a member of the League of Assassins. He and Green Arrow faced off against each other again when Merlin attempted to assassinate Batman, but Green Arrow managed to intercept Merlin's arrow with one of his own, saving Batman's life. Merlin admitted that Green Arrow had improved since their last encounter, but he escaped before he could be captured. In the show, the Dark Archer is played by John Barrowman and is named Malcolm Merlin, CEO of Merlin Global Group and father to Tommy Merlin and, spoiler alert for season 2, Thea Queen. He is a recurring character in the first 5 seasons and is a villain in most of his appearances, with the exception of a couple times throughout when it served his better interests. Spoiler alert yet again for season 5 because I feel obligated to because it's my favorite show. He ultimately dies in Lian Yu after Thea activates a landmine and he takes her place on it. They were lured there by Adrian Chase, aka Prometheus, so that Oliver could save his son, but yeah. If you haven't seen Arrow, go watch it, please.
Number 3, Starro versus the Justice League. Despite how ridiculous the idea of a massive starfish-looking alien that can control minds is, Starro the Conqueror is still one of the Justice League's earliest and most dangerous foes. All the way back in the Brave and the Bold issue 28 from 1960 is our first ever introduction to Starro. Now this was before he used starfish facehuggers to control minds and instead would use a telepathic beam to control huge scores of people. When Starro did this to a town of people using one of his deputies, the Flash happened to take note of the fact that one kid, Snapper Carr, who was possibly the most annoying kid to grace the pages of comics, was immune to the effects of Starro's mental control. But it was a mystery as to why. It turns out that Snapper was covered in calcium oxide, aka lime, from when he was working on a lawn earlier in the day. Lime, used by oystermen to fight starfish off of their oysters, also happens to block the powers of Starro, curiously enough, and so Green Lantern grabs a bunch of barrels of the stuff from a nearby farm, and the Flash grabs bags and bags of it from a chemical warehouse, and they team up to proceed to absolutely cover Starro in lime, imprisoning the Conqueror in an unbreakable shell of lime. As it says in the comics, a living statue of lime. Number 2, Firestorm vs. Parasite. Rudolph Jones found himself exposed to a strange form of radiation, which changed him into a bald, green-skinned parasite with the ability to absorb the life energy of others. Well, in Firestorm, the Nuclear Man, issue number 86, Parasite is released from an area he is being held in and goes on a rampage, draining multiple people of their life energy, including Firehawk, who fell pretty easily to this villain. Now luckily, the hero Firestorm is nearby. At this point in time, Firestorm has become the world's fire elemental and received a pretty significant power boost. Almost as if to prove this, Firestorm comes in hot on Parasite with a blast of flame, and then, when Parasite tries to drain Firestorm's power, the hero is completely unaffected as he says, quote, "My powers come not from myself, but from the earth. I don't have power, I am power." And in a last-ditch effort, Parasite decides to try and trade energy blasts with Firestorm. Now unfortunately for Parasite, it is nowhere near an equal fight. He uses up all of the energy he took from Firestorm, and then just trying to hold back Firestorm's blast, Parasite goes through his own reserved life energy until he is on the brink. Realizing he will lose, he begs Firestorm to stop, saying that Firestorm would bring the end for Parasite, to which Firestorm simply says, "That was my intention." Luckily for him, Parasite was saved by the allies of Firestorm who told him to stop, but this hero left Parasite emaciated from using up his own energy. And finally, and at number 1 is Joker versus the Red Skull. Now look, the Joker is a maniac, an absolutely insane criminal lunatic, but hey, he is an American criminal lunatic, goddamn. Which means dealing with someone with the past of the Red Skull is an absolute no-no. Yes, these two villains teamed up together in the Batman and Captain America Team-Up Special, back when DC and Marvel actually got along with each other. Naturally, these heroes' two greatest villains team up to take them on, but I guess it turns out that even Joker is above the morals of a World War II era war criminal. The Red Skull hires the Joker to steal an atomic doomsday device, which the Clown Prince of Crime totally agrees to do, until he sees Red Skull waltz out with a certain symbol front and center on his outfit, indicating his involvement in WW2, which is then confidently confirmed by the Red Skull. This is when the Joker delivers the line about being an American criminal lunatic, and the two simultaneously attack each other, Joker with his venom and the Red Skull with his, quote, dust of death, which they are both immune to. This is when Joker gets smacked over the back of the head with a wrench, but eventually the fight makes it onto a plane where the Joker overpowers Red Skull and they both go tumbling down through the sky alongside the atomic device they stole, destroying them both in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Now I don't know if I'm more shocked at Joker's switching of sides or the fact that they had a fist fight while straddling the top of an active fat boy. It could be either, I don't know.
And at 10, Chameleon. Being the first villain Spider-Man ever faced way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 1 in 1963, I think Chameleon is more underrated than he should be. Being able to look like anyone at any time is pretty damn overpowered, especially when you can use it to look like Spider-Man and use suction cups to stick to walls, even if that's slightly unrealistic. This character is especially powerful when he has superpowers, like in the 90s animated Spider-Man series, where he could simply look at you and end up transforming into you. That's actually insanely overpowered when you look at it like that, since he can also transform his clothes in that show. He could be fleeing from Spider-Man and then turn the corner and be anyone, so it's certainly someone to fear, unless they're the original version who has to use disguises and makeup to look like anyone they want, since that process takes time and it can't really be turned on or off at will. And at 9, Mysterio. First appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man number 13 from 1964, Quentin Beck does not possess any superhuman abilities. He is a formal special effects artist, illusionist, and actor who uses his talents to commit crimes. He is a founding member of the the Sinister Six as well, which is an impressive feat on its own considering how he has no powers. In the first battle with Spider-Man, after he frames Spider-Man for robbing the Midtown Museum, Mysterio obstructs the hero's spider sense with gas and dissolves his webbing with chemical abrasive. However, Spider-Man tricks Mysterio into revealing that he was the actual one who robbed the museum. Then Spider-Man revealed that he had captured that moment on tape. Mysterio was then sent to jail, blaming Spider-Man for his ruined career. However, the abilities of Mysterio are actually really impressive, with a lot of his powers seemingly only being able to be accomplished with CGI and post-production rather than with practical effects, which is what he was using. And I was actually going to be a special effects artist. I even started going to school for it, so trust me, his stuff is absolutely insane. And it ain't Venom. The symbiote that later became known as Venom was created by the Dark Elder God Null on a desolate nameless planet, where it saved a group of newborn baby rodenttoid aliens by bonding to them and transforming them into apex predators. The symbiote's first human host though was Deadpool, who came across its prison while on Battleworld and, hoping for a makeover, wore the creature for a few minutes before realizing it was alive and trying to take over his mind. Concerned that his insanity would adversely affect it, Deadpool returned the symbiote to its prison moments before the arrival of Spider-Man, whose own suit had been damaged in the battle that was going on outside that Deadpool just seemingly was ignoring. Spider-Man had found the prison module that the symbiote was trapped in and activated the machine, which released the symbiote in the form of a black sphere. When Spider-Man touched the sphere, it covered his body and transformed into the iconic black and white costume with large white spider emblems on the chest and back derived from Null's dragon emblem actually. Venom, even though the concept was bought from a fan for what would now be worth $550, became one of, if not the most iconic Spider-Man villain, and with the ability to block out the spider sense, it's a surprise Peter even managed to come out on top.
Coming in at number 7, we have the Predator. And no, I can assure you, you didn't accidentally switch over to an 80s movie themed YouTube channel. In a crossover event during the 90s, Gotham City found itself being used as the hunting ground by a member of the Predator race. Seeking out impressive warriors to fight, the Predator nearly started a civil war amongst Gotham's criminal underworld by killing some of the gangsters' best fighters, and even managing to put an intervening Batman into a full-body cast. Batman soon recovered, however, and was able to defeat the Predator and convince his race to leave Gotham alone by using a high-tech suit capable of seeing through the Predator's cloaking. Aliens being defeated by sonar-powered bat gadgets? Don't you just love comic books? Coming in at number 6, we've got to go with Clayface. When you're facing off against the world's greatest detective, being able to disguise yourself as anyone seems like a very useful skill to have. This alone would make Clayface a difficult foe for Batman to overcome, but combine that with the huge amounts of physical strength that Clayface possesses when he changes into his more monstrous form, and you have a rare mix of stealth and strength that keeps Bruce Wayne on his toes, usually forcing him to rely on a creative use of water to finally stop Clayface in his very muddy tracks.
Number 5, Superman vs. the Joker. The Injustice video game and comic books took the simple premise of an evil Superman and turned it into an awesome story with really cool moments. The designs created for the heroes are mostly really cool and only slight variations of their best looks. The reasons that heroes and villains choose sides against one another is also really cool, and it gives some of the most ridiculous shows of force for Superman himself. But it all kicks off with one simple event. The Joker decides that he has become bored of Gotham, so he turns his gaze on Metropolis. The dark and twisted games that this character plays work really well with Batman, who is in reality just a normal human named Bruce Wayne. But when the Joker has to face someone with actual power, he is exponentially way more likely to come out on the bottom. So, when he decided to crack Superman by tricking the hero into ending the life of Lois Lane and then blowing up a large part of Metropolis, he does succeed for just a few hours, until Superman shows up at the room where the clown is being interrogated by Batman, and Superman just bursts in, ignoring Batman completely, and in one cold move, he plunges his fist straight through the Joker's chest, stopping his heart immediately. And number 4, Midnight vs. Commander. The Authority is a really cool group from DC Comics' Wildstorm universe. The two most well-known heroes from the team would be Apollo and Midnighter, who are basically like Superman and Batman respectively, only these two are husband and husband, and Midnighter is almost insane. He is like Batman, but like Batman who is also mixed with the Punisher and maybe like a bit of Deadpool. And these stories get dark. In Mark Millar's run on the Authority, a villain by the name of Commander makes the very big mistake of attacking and forcing himself on Apollo. This was a hell of a mistake, because in response to those actions, Apollo, after recovering, burns Commander's legs so that he can't escape, and Midnighter shows up with a jackhammer. And the rest is something we are kept from seeing. If you want to check it out for yourself, you may be my guest, but you've been warned, it is quite haunting. Number 3, Captain Cold vs. Johnny Quick. If you have not read Forever Evil, I highly recommend you do. It's such a dark and crazy story that sees the villains of the DC Universe step into the heroic side to take down an evil Justice League from the alternate reality of Earth 3. Each member of this crime syndicate of America is a sick and twisted perversion of their prime Earth counterpart. But of all of them, Johnny Quick, the stand-in for the Flash, may be the most messed up. He's a completely deranged serial killer in his world. And one villain just can't stand for someone dragging the Flash's name in the dirt like that. Leonard Snart, Captain Cold. In their confrontation, Mr. Quick gets a hold of Cold's weapon, the Cold Gun, and then gloats about how he had taken the life of the alternate Snart on Earth 3, and how Captain Cold is defenseless without his finger on the trigger of his weapon. Well, it turns out that Snart singing Jingle Bells Batman Smells activates the Cold Gun voice trigger, which then completely freezes Quick's leg, which is when Captain Cold takes his big old right boot heel and completely shatters this maniac's leg. Have fun accessing the Speed Force now, psycho! In at number 2, Black Panther and the Skrulls. Wakanda, like the other fictional kingdoms of Atlantis and Latveria, is protected by a man who will do anything to protect his people. T'Challa doesn't really have the luxury of sparing those that would do harm to his incredibly advanced home, but Wakanda is also one of the #1 places targeted when an invading force wants to take over Earth. So, taking those two facts into account, when the Skrulls tried to invade Wakanda to start their mission of dominating the world, T'Challa and his wife Storm of the X-Men left those aliens with a clear message. After tricking the Skrulls into inflicting pain on their own men for information, the Skrulls sent out their best warriors for the task of taking down the pair. But just as those toughest warriors are gone from sight, an army of Wakandan soldiers breaks into the Skrull ship and leaves not a single Skrull soul alive. While that's happening, those quote toughest warriors are turned into pulp by Black Panther, with T'Challa using their blood to write quote, "This is what happens when you invade Wakanda," on the bridge of the Skrull ship, Cold. Number 1, Constantine vs. Dr. Fate. It's funny, I never really thought I'd see Dr. Fate as a villain, and in a way this isn't exactly that. It's more like the Helmet of Fate and Naboo himself is the villain. In Constantine Future's End, John has stolen the Helmet of Fate, who without a wearer is just a measly old artifact with one of the world's most powerful sorcerers trapped inside. Allowing himself to get ensnared by the helmet, linking John and Naboo's minds, John trapped Naboo in the auditorium of Anubis. He fairly challenges Naboo to prove that he has actually ever cared about anyone other than himself in front of the ancient Egyptian god. If Naboo wins, then Constantine dies and Naboo is free to do what he does. Despite his great deeds though, he can't actually prove that he cares about anyone. When Constantine summoned the helmet, it immediately started influencing people to come and claim the helmet and save Naboo. But Constantine had set up a man to subdue each person that was called by the helmet, and when one person didn't make it, another would be called, and then another, and so on. Each person just being used as a tool by Naboo, who didn't care what happened to any of them. He proves that Naboo doesn't give a damn, and then Naboo is eaten by Anubis, just straight up eaten. Now it turns out, even the challenge was a trick, with Constantine making a deal with the demon Ifrit, who now inhabits the Helmet of Fate in the place of and sort of alongside Naboo, bargaining with those who choose to wear the helmet from this point forward. Coming in at number 10 is Daredevil vs. Bullseye. Imagine being the guy who continuously gets his butt handed to him by Daredevil to the point that you've been saved and brought back to multiple times with enhancements, and he still leaves you stuck in an iron lung with the ability to do nothing but stare and talk very quietly. Imagine being that guy, and in another act of attempted vengeance, you mastermind a whole evil plan to get your revenge with your limited communication abilities, and then in Daredevil Volume 3, number 27, this red-suited man without fear unravels your plans and then makes sure the jar that's keeping you alive gets filled with a toxic chemical, leaving you completely blind. Well, that's what happened to Bullseye. As Foggy Nelson said, once the deadliest man in the world, and now all he will be is a living brain inside a flesh and bone coffin. That's terrifying. Number Number 9. The Hulk vs. Abomination. Abomination in the MCU was once an incredibly intimidating villain, and he still sort of is, but also kind of like a hippie, and kind of funny. In the comics though, Emil Blonsky is absolutely ruthless. General rule for the MCU movies for you right here. If you like a character, just imagine them doing everything they do, but turn it up to 10 and then you'll have their comic book counterpart. Mostly. What my point is here is that the Abomination is psychotic, and the Hulk is way more brutal. So, when the Abomination took the life of Betty Ross using his irradiated blood, he was not getting out of it easy. When they come head to head in The Incredible Hulk Volume 25 from 2000, it's arguably one of the best Incredible Hulk fights I've ever seen. Emil comes walking out of the water, and before he even knows what happens, Hulk is on him like shrimps on the barbie. The ground around them almost instantly becomes rubble. The fight travels underwater and through a dam, flooding a whole town. All the while, these two green Goliaths are in a close combat slog match. And then, Emil decides to taunt the Hulk, which is just dumb because it just makes him angrier, increasing his strength, and the Hulk absolutely pummels the Abomination, laying on fist after fist after fist, causing minor earthquakes and leaving Emil on the edge of life with his brain exposed. It's insane. This comic really shows the relationship between these two on a level that's not really captured anywhere else, and you should read it just for their relationship, honestly. Number 8. Batman vs. Thugs. Have you ever played the Batman Arkham games? The combat in those games is absolutely fantastic, but it still leaves me wondering how many of these random street thugs actually survive after their interaction with Batman, because I doubt it. He hits hard, and he is pretty unforgiving about it, which serves his whole point of instilling fear, sure, but I think because these nameless thugs are cannon fodder, they essentially get the worst beatings of most of Batman's villains, and we never hear from most of them again. So that tells you all you need to know. As an example, let's talk about a group of thugs in the All-Star Batman and Robin series, issue number 7. Now this comic is written by Frank Miller, who seems to be able to get away with making Batman do pretty much anything, I guess. There's no rules with Frank Miller. In the opening pages of the issue, Batman comes speeding into a group of armed thugs, foot first, maniacally laughing like the Joker, and talking in his head about how Gotham is full of cockroaches. He relishes in the fact that the criminals are so scared that they are disposing of each other accidentally, and then he sets fire to a bottle of bleach and tosses it into the criminals, blanketing them in fire, and then continuously beating the snot out of them while they're on fire. And then what happens next? You'll never guess, because Black Canary pops up out of nowhere, and these two superheroes just start making out and getting busy while the thugs are literally barbecuing in the background. Unfortunately, yes, this is Batman, but not my Batman. Number 7. Jericho vs. Vigilante. Joey Wilson, aka Jericho, is technically usually a superhero, despite being the son of Deathstroke, one of the world's best assassins. The same serum that gave Deathstroke his powers and enhancements also gave Jericho his powers, but they differ largely from Deathstroke's. Jericho has a very unique and powerful ability that allows him to transfer his consciousness into the body of another and take control of them by making eye contact with that person. Unfortunately, every time he did this, a small shred of the individual's psyche remained in his head. At first, it was nothing that he couldn't deal with, but over time, possessing multiple people, he had so many psyches running around his head it drove him insane and put him on a warpath that needed to see him brought down. The rogue anti-hero known as Vigilante was the one to take on the responsibility of stopping Jericho, but because of Jericho's sister insisting that Jericho was a good person at heart and should not lose his life, Vigilante decided to not deal with this threat in a completely lethal way. No, instead, Vigilante just completely took Jericho's eyes from his head. Blind and unable to use his powers, the threat of his abilities was gone, but I'm pretty sure it did nothing to stop his mental instability. In fact, it likely made it worse. Number 6. Wally West vs. Inertia. Inertia was a young villainous Thaddeus Thawne. Inertia is to Bart Allen, aka Impulse, what Eobard Thawne is to Barry Allen. He is his reverse. Now, Inertia had been raised his whole life to absolutely despise speedsters of any kind. He learned to be a villain from others, but his actions were all of his own. So, when Inertia made the mistake of taking the life of his opposite, Bart Allen, he would be made to suffer the consequences. Unfortunately for him, those consequences came in the form of Wally West, one of the most powerful speedsters ever. After taunting Wally about the fact he just took the life of his sidekick, in All Flash #1, Wally takes the young villain, who had the potential to be reformed, mind you, and removes his ability to move at all, traps Inertia in a museum as one of the exhibits, only able to blink once every 100 years, and leaves the kid there still thinking in real time during all of this, meaning he's driven slowly and pretty surely insane. And just as the cherry on top, Wally left him facing the exhibit of Bart Allen, the man that Inertia could have been. It's an incredibly dark fate for a hero to impose on a villain, especially one that small.
Halfway through, in at number 5, Bizarro. Being first introduced in Superboy number 68 from 1958, Bizarro was actually a teen at first. However, an adult version of the character was introduced in the Superman newspaper comic strip, but he was wearing a B on his chest instead of an S. However, in 1959, we saw an adult version of the character introduced into the Superman comic books, this time wearing an S in Action Comics number 254. Despite his complicated history though, Bizarro has all the powers of Superman except reversed. So instead of heat vision, he has freeze vision, flame breath, vacuum breath. Imagine a freaking Bizarro vacuum. That would be blessed. Why hasn't anyone branded vacuums like that yet? Like, this is an untapped market. And yes, I do mean actual vacuums, you sickos. And his other abilities are also flipped, like being able to see through only lead. And Bizarro is strengthened by green kryptonite, which only makes things worse for normal soups, am I right? While Bizarro never really seems to come out on top, does that mean that since everything for him is reversed that he's actually winning all the time? Because if that is the case, I don't know if he should be on this list, because in his mind technically he would be undefeated, right? And at 4, General Zod. General Zod was first introduced in Adventure Comics number 283 from 1961 and is also a Kryptonian like Superman, therefore has the same powers, which makes him a pretty powerful adversary. It's like the whole conundrum of if you fought yourself, who would win? Or would you just keep fighting until you both collapse from exhaustion? However, what he has over Kal-El is experience. Being the leader of the Kryptonian military, Zod is an expert tactician and is trained in hand-to-hand combat. And while yes, they both pack a punch, knowing how to fight or predict your opponent's moves is also critical to winning. However, Zod's powers are often inferior to those of Superman, due to Superman being exposed to the yellow sun over the course of his entire life, while Zod typically only gets it for a short period of time before being returned to the Phantom Zone. This greater power combined with the superior control and experience with it gives Superman an edge over Zod's actual fighting skills, so that he does end up losing more commonly than not, if ever. So sorry, Zod. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Brainiac. First introduced in Action Comics number 242 from 1958, Brainiac is one of Superman's greatest villains and has a personal connection with the hero, since he shrunk and stole the capital city of Krypton, known as Kandor, and in some continuities is even responsible for Krypton's destruction. Brainiac's most consistent power is his 12th level intellect, allowing calculation abilities, enhanced memory, and advanced understanding of mechanical engineering, bioengineering, physics, and other theoretical and applied sciences, as well as extensive knowledge of various alien tech, because of course he does. And while that sounds confusing, we as a 21st century society are considered to have a 9th level intellect. Or as his post-crisis version explains, he can process the sort of knowledge over 490 octodectillion beings could, which is absolutely monstrous, okay? Just so you can see it, that's about 490 with another 59 zeros after it people worth of human brain power that he uses on a regular basis. So yeah, he's definitely a smart cookie, but not the one that they use in Squid Game. Is that still a popular thing? Penultimately, in number 2, Darkseid. Darkseid was first introduced in Forever People #1 and is the tyrannical ruler of Apokolips and leader of the New Gods. As a new god, however, Darkseid is among the most powerful beings in the DC universe. His most well-known and utilized ability derives from the Omega Effect, which allows him to blast Omega beams from his eyes. Omega beams are an intense form of basically heated energy that can either act as a concussive force to subdue an opponent, or as a disintegrating agent capable of eradicating organisms or objects from existence. Awesome. Some superpowered beings, such as Superman, have proven resistant to the beams, although Superman does it with a great deal of pain. The Omega beams can also resurrect fallen beings that have previously been killed by them, and Darkseid will use this sometimes if he wants to punish people who fail him, but they're too valuable to kill at the moment. Darkseid also has pinpoint control over this energy, and his unwavering aim allows him to just control the memes to go wherever he goes. They can travel in straight lines, they can bend, they can curve around corners, even pass through matter and other forms of energy, which just makes these already horrifying things absolutely terrifying. And finally, in at number 1, Doomsday. First appearing in Superman Man of Steel number 17 in 1992, Doomsday was invented to be a beast that would kill Superman, since writers were growing concerned about how other villains relied too much on their tech or brain power to try to beat Superman. This was probably also to show that yes, even Superman can die, to give other heroes I guess something to fear, or I guess the readers something to fear. Doomsday is depicted as a monstrous, genetically engineered being from the depths of prehistoric Krypton. His creator imbued him with a few feelings, mostly hate and the desire for destruction, which let's face it, same. But this led to him destroying worlds and eventually finding Earth, where he met Superman. Doomsday is the one who killed Superman in Kelly's favorite The Death of Superman storyline, and the big thing with Doomsday is his ability to evolve. Doomsday gradually becomes more invulnerable, if not injured beyond his ability to recover. Superman once used a sound gun to greatly discomfort him, but Doomsday's auditory canals closed up, making him impervious to the weapon next time. So basically anything that hurts or kills him basically won't do that a second time, which is absolutely absurd and definitely makes him one of Superman's greatest foes. And you know, he's the only one who killed him, so yeah, that's a number 1.
Number 10, Blockbuster. Just like the video rental store that lives far off in a warm place in some of our memories, the villain of the same name, Blockbuster, met a very swift and some could say unjust end. Blockbuster may be a relatively unknown villain to some, and that may be due to the fact that he was primarily a Nightwing villain operating in Bloodhaven. In a tragic series of events, Blockbuster's mother passed away, and Blockbuster blamed this on Nightwing. He set out on a campaign to ruin the hero's life, attempting to take away anything and anyone that mattered to Dick Grayson instead of trying to hurt Nightwing himself. When Nightwing was at his absolute lowest in Nightwing 1996 number 93 from 2004, after a slog of a fight that moved out onto a fire escape, Nightwing had Blockbuster on the ropes when the new vigilante, Tarantula, showed up ready to bring Blockbuster to an end. Now, in a move I just did not see coming, Nightwing leaves his morals at the door, realizing Blockbuster will never stop, and he steps aside to allow Tarantula to end the villain's life. He then went and freaked the hell out while Tarantula started to seduce him. It was really weird, but it happened. Number 9, Spider-Man vs. Firelord. I think it is a well-known fact that Spider-Man pulls his punches. It's part of the reason he is one of the best heroes, but I always forget how much he actually pulls those punches. For example, in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 270, a black-suited Spider-Man puts one hell of a beating on a former Herald of Galactus, Firelord. Previously, Firelord had been wandering the cosmos when he stopped in New York to enjoy the culture, I guess, only to be attacked by firemen and then kicked in the face by Spider-Man. Now, the Lord of Fire wants his revenge. After leading Firelord on a merry chase through office buildings, Grand Central Station, the subway system, into a construction zone, having a building demolished on top of the fiery villain, and then leading him to a gas station which explodes, Spider-Man, at his wit's end, musters all his effort and his spider sense to lay an incredible beatdown of speed, agility, and raw strength on Firelord, getting so lost in his bloodlust until Captain America and the Avengers show up to be like, dude, you got him. Chill out. And in at number 8 is Deadpool vs. Bullseye. Reading through issue 11 of the 2008 volume of Deadpool just made me remember why I love Deadpool. Not that I forgot or anything, but man, he's just nuts, which makes it so good when the foe he faces is almost just as bonkers as he is. This time, it's Hawkeye, but not actually Hawkeye. It's actually Bullseye dressed as Hawkeye because this is happening during Dark Reign, and that's a long story on its own, which maybe we should do an attempt to explain of that at some point. For now though, Bullseye/Hawkeye has been contracted to take down Deadpool. In the last issue, he managed to get an arrow right through Mr. Pool's noggin. So, in this issue, Deadpool takes it out and his brain is still half regenerated as he tries to take on Bullseye at this meat farm. Now listening to his half-formed brain, Deadpool takes cover into a meat locker and decides his best course of action is to, quote, be the meat, and he suits up in a butchered pig using it as makeshift armor. Wade charges Mr. I, who had conveniently run out of arrows, lands a good crack, rack, and a crock, and then takes a swift kick to the no man's land. The fight transitions to the kitchen where Bull's Hawkeye, or whatever you want to call him, comes at Wade with a buzzsaw, and Deadpool, wielding 2 meat hooks, trips, grips, and sends a hook straight through this fellow mercenary's chest. The dynamic between these 2 psychos is just a treat to read, but I'd honestly recommend just reading the whole of this volume of Deadpool itself. It's fantastic. Number 7, Storm and Emma Frost. A bit of a lesser known rivalry between 2 comic book characters is the one between Aurora Monroe, Storm of the X-Men, and Emma Frost, the White Queen of the Hellfire Club. Now back in the day, Emma was a villain more than anything else, and during Uncanny X-Men 151 and 152, the White Queen ambushed Storm using her telepathic powers to swap their bodies, and then enacted a plan for the Hellfire Club to attack the X-Mansion. Now after a whole lot of kerfuffle involving Kitty Pryde, Emma lost control of Storm's powers, and that gave Storm the opportunity to swap their minds back. Storm gets the tempest caused by Frost under control, then saves the White Queen from a massive fall, all heroic like, but being the villain, Emma tries yet again to attack Miss Monroe, prompting Storm to straight up smack Emma with a massive bolt of lightning. She flies up into the air, raging like the goddess she is, then flies back down, grabs Frost by the throat, and scares the hell out of her by almost taking her life before Wolverine, of all people, talks her back to morality. It's fantastic. I love Emma Frost, but I think because of this, I love Storm a little bit more. Number 6, Kingpin vs. Grey Hulk. The Hulk is an interesting character. He's gone through many changes over time, even having different identities than just his regular green, savage, smashy smash one. One of his first, when he was still a Grey Hulk, would be Joe Fixit. Joe Fixit is a persona of the Hulk who is a relatively intelligent Las Vegas mob enforcer. It's great. Well, this year, in 2023, he got his own series. Fixit is specifically the enforcer for the Berengeti crime family, and in the series, Mr. Berengeti's operation becomes the focus of a certain Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin of Crime, who is planning to strong-arm a takeover. Problem is, you can't really strong-arm anything when one of the people you're facing off against is the Incredible Hulk. The best part about Joe Fixit is the fact that no one seems to be able to work out that he is just another version of the Hulk, so he is constantly underestimated. Within the first few moments of Kingpin's meeting with Mr. Berengeti, the plan he had goes south very quickly, and he decides to smash the man's desk, which is when Mr. Fixit enters the fray. Fisk's goon is slapped aside like a piece of unwanted salami, and then Fisk, who has gone toe-to-toe with Spider-Man, who, as we know from part 1 of this list, is usually holding back, comes bull-charging at Fixit, who obviously tanks 3 blows without flinching before grabbing Wilson's fist, hoisting the massive villain over his head, and then throwing him through the floor into the casino, and then picking him up and slamming him down into the floor again, and then holding his arm hostage until Fisk says that the meeting is over in English, then French, then Pig Latin. Priceless.
At number 5, we've got a literal god of the Greek pantheon with Ares, the god of war. In an alternate universe in which Ares declared war against the entirety of existence, Batman stood with the rest of the Justice League in a battle that literally lasted for eons, until the sole combatants left in the entire universe were Ares and Batman, still standing through sheer willpower alone. After landing a blow that knocked Ares' magical helmet off, Batman was forced to put the helmet on to finally defeat and decapitate the God of War, leaving him the only survivor of this burned out universe. And while this version of Bruce Wayne would go on to become the Merciless, a bat-themed god of war from the dark multiverse, it still goes to show that the Batman is capable of taking down literal gods. Speaking of literal gods, we've got someone that's weirdly close enough with the infamous Bat-Mite coming in at number 4. A troublesome imp from the same 5th dimension as the Superman villain Mr. Mxyzptlk, the Bat-Mite is honestly more of a nuisance than a flat-out supervillain, often appearing just to try and challenge Batman or to see more of his heroic acts. Sending Bat-Mite back to his own dimension is usually a tall order, given his complete reality warping powers, but luckily, the world's greatest detective is usually smart enough to outwit Bat-Mite and send him packing to where he truly belongs.
Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Damien Darhk. Damien Darhk was the big bad for season 4 of Arrow, and ultimately was one of the most powerful villains Oliver had ever faced in the show, or even still has ever faced. Using a totem found on Lian Yu, because of course it was, everyone who dies around Damien can be absorbed as some form of mystical power that grants him plenty of different powers, much like those granted to Jedi through use of the Force. I'm not even kidding. Damien can stop people in their tracks, choke them, drain the life from them just by touching them, he has super strength, he can catch arrows midair with magic. Not to mention the team up in Legends of Tomorrow with Malcolm Merlin and Eobard Thawne. Damien did ultimately eat the dust though at the end of season 4, when Oliver, with the positive vibes of an entire city behind him, ends up being able to overpower Dark's magic even after an entire city of deaths was powering him. Haven Rock's destruction was one of the turning points of the series, with tens of thousands of people getting killed in the explosion. Damien at this point was literally able to disintegrate arrows and bullets without even trying. Oliver shoots arrows at him and they just like turn into smoke in front of him, and Damien's like, oh, I didn't even mean to do that. Penultimately, in at number 2, Deathstroke. Being introduced in the New Teen Titans number 2 in 1980 as Deathstroke the Terminator, Deathstroke is often seen as the archenemy to the Teen Titans. However, the character has also served as a villain for Batman, Green Arrow, and the Justice League, and is the main antagonist of Arrow Season 2. The show seems to be a more powerful version though when talking about brute strength, since his blood at this point contains Mirakuru, a basically super soldier serum that was ironically again found on Lian Yu and used to save Slade's life. After the Mirakuru is in his bloodstream though, he develops serious anger issues, and this is actually tied to his strength. The character returns in season 2 to extract revenge on Oliver by killing the ones he loves, but was ultimately defeated after Felicity injects him with the Mirakuru cure. The character then regains possession of all his marbles and helps Oliver in the season 5 finale, as well as having his own arc to find his son in season 6. Oliver helps Slade do this though, even though Slade killed Oliver's mother in the season 2 episode Seeing Red, but using a deleted scene from season 2, Oliver saves his mother in the post-crisis timeline that he creates, which is honestly something that I can respect. If you're recreating the universe, or the multiverse even, you might as well resurrect your dead friends and family, if you can. Finally, in at number 1, the Anti-Monitor. This is a show exclusive as far as I'm aware, since this played out totally differently in the comics. However, in the Arrowverse Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover event, Oliver dies while trying to save as many people from Earth 38 as possible, resulting in over 3 billion lives being saved while he held off the Shadow Demons. Later on though, Oliver, instead of being resurrected by the Lazarus Pit and having his soul restored to his body, ends up becoming the Spectre, a pseudo-god in the DC universe, and the catalyst to restoring the multiverse in this crossover. This also comes with a wicked set of powers, but nonetheless in a one-on-one fight, Oliver both held his own and beat the Anti-Monitor head to head, which is freaking nuts. This man had literally wiped out the multiverse, and yet here we are with a new set of Earths because Oliver, with the help of the Paragons, willed it so. The battle was wicked, the death was heartbreaking, yet either way Oliver managed to defeat what was in essence a god, the god of the antimatter universe certainly, and gain some sweet powers to boot. Attaboy, Oliver, you're who I pray to now.
Coming in at number 10 is Batman vs. Prometheus. This may be one of the silliest yet coldest Batman takedowns I have ever seen. In fact, down in the comments, I want you guys to let me know your favorite absolutely wacky Batman takedowns. But for now, let me explain this one. The first time Prometheus encounters the Justice League, and specifically Batman, he overcomes them all, just showing how much of a force to be reckoned with that he is. As for how he brought down Batman in hand-to-hand combat, the villain does what all villains do and gloats about how he did it. Using his helmet, he is able to program the skills of the 30 greatest martial arts masters in the world, including Batman himself, into his body and brain for his own use. Not one to be outdone like that though. When the time comes for the rematch, Batman cheats and forces Prometheus into using an older version of his helmet, but this version had been tampered with by Batman so that instead of the 30 greatest martial artists, Prometheus now has access to the physical abilities and skills of none other than Professor Stephen Hawking. Now, Batman could very easily punch the lights out of Prometheus, who is stuck with muscular neuron disease that renders him a drooling catatonic. God, it's almost offensive, but it's just so good and such a Batman thing to do, like outthinking his opponent like that. Number 9, Magneto versus the Red Skull. Magneto and the Red Skull are on opposite sides of history. Magneto grew up in a Jewish family living in Germany during World War II, and we all know Red Skull and Hydra's stance in World War II Germany, so it's safe to say that these two villains will almost never get along. Right? In Acts of Vengeance from 1989, Magneto and Red Skull were actually temporarily united. But it's really important to note that Magneto was unsure whether this was the Red Skull that aided Germany in the slaughter of his people. So Magneto confronted him, and the Red Skull confirmed that he was indeed the original, which was a mistake. It didn't take much for Magneto, the master of magnetism, to overpower the Skull, but unlike what you might think, Magneto does not take his life. Instead, Magneto leaves the Skull isolated in a stripped down fallout shelter 20 feet underground. He removed the ladder from the escape hatch, gave him 10 gallons of water, took out his homing transmitters, gave him no food and no light, just water, air, and his own depraved thoughts. Number 8, Peter Parker versus Kingpin. If there's one thing you just don't do, it's messing with Aunt May. After Peter had revealed his identity to the world, his past villains were all coming back to get some more personal revenge. This put his family in danger, and despite his best attempts to protect them, when an assassin tried to bring him down, he dodged out of the way and Aunt May happened to be in the line of fire. This transitioned immediately to the Back in Black Spider-Man arc, which saw Peter don his black spider suit and go on a warpath to find out who was responsible for hiring the assassin. Eventually, Peter learns that it was none other than Kingpin who hired the goon. Fisk was in prison at this time, but using an extremely large stash of cash that he somehow had hidden within his prison furniture, I don't know, it's a comic book, just roll with it, Fisk was able to get out of his cell, release the other inmates, and get about halfway through the prison before Spider-Man came crashing in. And after letting Kingpin monologue a little bit, he proceeds to lay an incredible beatdown on the Kingpin of crime in front of an entire prison wing of his underlings. But then, to make it much more personal, Spider-Man takes off the black suit to show that it's Peter Parker beating the snot out of Kingpin. Then he slaps the hell out of Fisk, threatens to spin webbing down his throat, and then explains how pathetic he is in front of all of his underlings, striking right at the Kingpin's massive pride. Number 7, Superman and the Manchester Black beatdown. What's so funny about truth, justice, and the American way? I don't know. But what I do know is that the Superman story that uses that question as its title, also known as Action Comics issue number 775 for any of you who want to know, is awesome. Essentially, this comic sees the arrival of a group of heroes called the Elite that fight crime, but in an incredibly bombastic and brutal way, with no regard for lives lost. This flies directly in the face of the moralities of heroes like Superman and Batman, but apparently not. The leader of this band of villainous heroes goes by the name Manchester Black, and he has an incredible level of telekinesis, able to punch a hole in a mountain with a simple thought. He is incredibly capable, and so are his team, fixing problems before Superman can even get to the scene. Now eventually, Superman, attempting to stop them from operating using such brutal forms of justice, gets his butt handed back to him during one of their first altercations. But that was Superman with the gloves on. As fast as a speeding bullet, Superman takes down the other 3 members of the Elite, leaving only Manchester Black left. Now in a move colder than I've ever seen before, Superman subtly uses his heat vision through Manchester's eye and cuts the connection between Chester and his telekinetic powers. Essentially, he lobotomized Chester using his heat vision, taking the ability to use his powers at least until the JLA could arrive, and he left the Elite in an unconscious dog pile. Number 6, Magneto beating Apocalypse. Magneto and Apocalypse are 2 incredibly powerful mutant villains with frighteningly similar goals, and yet we never really fully see them teaming up. But we also rarely ever see them fight either, except in the Age of Apocalypse reality. In this world, the Mutant Legion had gone back in time in an attempt to bring an end to Magneto, but he inadvertently caused the passing of Xavier, his father, which led to a world where Magneto forms and leads the X-Men, and Apocalypse has nearly taken over the whole world. This all came to a head in X-Men Omega. Now, on paper, while Magneto is powerful with a capital P, when compared to Apocalypse, he should be a walk in the park for the second mutant to ever exist, and their fight going on simultaneously with about 3 or 4 other little skirmishes is intense. It's full of great lines, crazy twists and turns, but the best part is right near the end. Apocalypse has Magneto on the ropes, and he gloats in his own glory, wondering why the Master of Magnetism isn't fighting back. Now, staring straight into Apocalypse's eyes, Magneto says, "I can't, I'm concentrating." And then they both look down to see Magneto's hands at his abdomen as he completely rips Apocalypse in two straight down the middle in the most awesome looking panel I have ever seen. It's so good.
Halfway through, in at number 5, Venom 2099. Venom 2099 is actually Kron Stone, the son of Tyler Stone, and as revealed later on, the older half-brother of Miguel O'Hara, who is the Spider-Man of 2099. Talk about family issues. Kron became violent and brutal after suffering for years because of his abusive robot maid. Yeah, this is certainly an interesting origin. Either way, this all drove him into killing Punisher 2099's family. This was also before gaining any superpowers, since the encounter with Jake Gallows, who is Punisher 2099, nearly gets him killed. So Kron flees into the sewer, narrowly escaping with his life. And, you know, since he was absolutely destroyed and hardly clinging to life, he ended up floating down the sewer, eventually running into this strange black ball. This black ball was actually the mutated form of the Venom symbiote that had somehow survived without a host all this time. The symbiote, who was also on the brink of death, bonded to Kron and they became Venom 2099. This new version of the Venom symbiote also had acidic saliva and blood, so that does make him more dangerous than the original Venom. But Miguel was still able to come out on top. Attaboy, Miguel. Spider-Man 2099's costume is so sick, man. And at 4, Carnage. When the Venom symbiote came to rescue its host Eddie Brock from jail, it left an asexually produced offspring behind. This spawn bonded to Cletus Cassidy, a renowned serial killer in the Marvel Universe, through a wound on his hand, merging with his blood and becoming red and black in color. Now going by the name of Carnage, Cletus became a deadly recurring enemy to both Spider-Man and Venom. Eventually, Carnage fought Spider-Man and actually beat him. Realizing that Carnage was another symbiote villain, Spider-Man enlisted the aid of Venom, who was actually retired at the time, to defeat him. After enlisting Venom's aid against Carnage, Spider-Man later used loud noises in an attempt to defeat both Cletus and Venom, which is a stone cold move. However, thanks to Cletus' psychopathic tendencies and the fact that he was created on Earth, he has a lot more abilities than his father, like shooting itself as a projectile and forming razor-sharp weapons to tear through both innocents and his enemies, with chef-like precision, may I add. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Atrocity. Introduced and only seen in the Spider-Man game Spider-Man Edge of Time from 2011, Atrocity was created after Anti-Venom went into a blind rage, accidentally knocking Otto Octavius and Walker Sloan into Walker Sloan's gateway. Time-traveling gateway, by the way. The three then fused in the space-time continuum. I tried getting Taylor to put this on a list for ages, so here I am putting it here because holy damn, this is a villain. Atrocity would occasionally attack Parker or O'Hara with its teleportation tentacles throughout their journey in the Alchemax building, until it eventually revealed itself and attacked Peter Parker. Atrocity was defeated but would later appear again, attempting to kill Peter Parker at the same time that the CEO of Alchemax was fighting Miguel O'Hara. We, as Parker, manipulated Atrocity into attacking electrified pillars, stunning it. Peter then took this opportunity to remove Atrocity's tentacles and send them through the time gateway. These tentacles were then used to drain the Alchemax CEO of his powers. After both Atrocity and the Alchemax CEO, who is revealed to be Peter Parker, were vulnerable, they were knocked into the gateway together simultaneously, resetting the timeline. This absolute monstrosity is also able to teleport himself through time and space, in the addition to all of his powers. So yeah, an atrocity for sure. Penultimately, in at number 2, Red Goblin. After the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Carnage symbiote was secured in the Lockbox, a privately run vault at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Agents Crane and Coleman, though, infiltrated the Lockbox and stole the symbiote, delivering it to their employer, Norman Osborn. After receiving the symbiote, Osborn bonded with it to become the new Carnage, hoping that it would be the key to regaining his Green Goblin persona. While the symbiote initially seized control of him, Norman offered to teach it more nuanced and sadistic ways to kill people, an offer that the symbiote eagerly accepted, turning over control to its new host, restoring his appearance and purging his body of the nanites, preventing him from augmenting himself with the Goblin formula. Osborn then used the symbiote to kill Phil Urich, and after pretending to be mortally wounded in a rematch against Spider-Man as the Green Goblin, unveiled his new partner by transforming into the monstrous Red Goblin. Osborn used the symbiote to great effect, incapacitating Spider-Man's allies and loved ones, and bonding a portion of it to his his grandson Normie Osborn to turn him into the Goblin Child. Spidey was only able to defeat Red Goblin by taunting Osborn, saying that killing him in that form would only give Carnage the credit and not him, which caused him to rip off the symbiote. Then Spider-Man was able to destroy it. Finally, and at number 1, Graviton. If you're not familiar with Graviton, just know that he's essentially Magneto, but with gravity instead of metal, which is already making you think, oh, and that's exactly right. During the Acts of Vengeance crossover storyline, Graviton essentially crushed Spider-Man in their first encounter, only for Spider-Man to come back and absolutely wipe the floor with him when he got the Captain Universe powers. But that may seem a little cheap when talking about a list of Spider-Man villains. So, how about when Graviton was a part of a group of villains that sought revenge on Spider-Man following the loss of his cosmic powers? Spider-Man was still able to defeat Graviton without the power cosmic. During the fight though, Graviton actually disabled Spider-Man's gravity, sending the web slinger floating up into the sky. But Spider-Man was able to web onto a passing plane before he actually got too high. And then when Spidey got back to the ground and to the fight, he took an unprotected by gravity Graviton out with one single punch. So needless to say, Spider-Man has some pretty sick licks to lay out. And at 10, Lex Luthor. While you can't really have a list of Superman villains without Lex, the character isn't all that powerful when you look at it. Sure, he's popular among fans and runs a business, so he has some pull in society and whatnot, but in reality, he's just the dude with mommy issues that is just jealous of Superman. Sure, at some points he may wear and pilot a mech suit that gives him advanced weaponry and whatnot, but otherwise he's just a guy who pays other guys to fight for him. Which I mean, in a sense, money is power, but when compared to other people on this list, and even compared to Superman, Lex doesn't really have much going for him, aside from maybe a little bit of kryptonite. But Lex is constantly losing to Supes as well, which only makes him angrier, and that's just funny as hell to me. We love it when a jerk gets mad because he didn't get what he wants. Lex is kind of like a brat, you know? The kind of brat that will team up with their parents to take out the town's crazy dude if they need to. You know what I mean? Any kid's movie basically has one of these characters. Spiderwick Chronicles, okay? The big sister is pretty much like this. She's like that until she gets her leg bit by a goblin and realizes that her brothers ain't crazy. That's Lex. And at 9, Steppenwolf. Because everyone prefers the theatrical version of Justice League, right? Steppenwolf was introduced in New Gods number 7 from 1972 and is a new god and military general from the planet Apocalypse. Steppenwolf is the brother of Hegra and therefore the maternal uncle of Darkseid, which is a really weird family dynamic given that he is commonly depicted as Darkseid's subordinate, commanding his nephew's army of parademons in conflict against Superman and the Justice League. In the theatrical version of the Justice League movie, Steppenwolf is actually the main villain instead of Darkseid. However, you shouldn't discount the dark side of the moon's uncle, because Steppenwolf is immortal and has vast superhuman strength, speed, and endurance, capable of lifting up to 10,000 tons and jumping huge distances easily. He has superhuman reflexes and a high degree of invulnerability, which increases with his battle armor and allows him to resist most physical and energetic attacks. So while yes, they did manage to defeat him, it was still quite the battle. And at 8, Metallo. John Corbin is usually featured as either a willing volunteer for a surgery or a mortally wounded test subject that needs this surgery to save his life. Metallo first appeared in the Superman comic strip storyline The Menace of Metallo, which ran from the 15th of December 1958 to the 4th of April 1959. This procedure, whether willing or not, ends up turning John into a cyborg powered by a kryptonite heart, which I think you know what that means. While usually working as another supervillain's lackey, Metallo has the strength to go head to head with the Man of Steel, especially given that he has the strength of Superman and then weakens him with his heart when he's nearby. Metallo's robot body offers him a high degree of protection from physical and energy attacks as well. Among his enhanced abilities, he also no longer needs to eat, sleep, or breathe. And isn't that the dream? His brain is also sealed away inside a shielded alloy skull that has its own power supply. So trust me, I know. Sentient robots that want to kill are definitely not something to be trifled with. At least the timeline for Metallo isn't all that complicated. And it's 7, Parasite. The Raymond Maxwell Jensen version of the Parasite first appeared in Action Comics number 340 from 1966 and is basically like some weird form of mind melder that has the ability to temporarily absorb the life energy, superpowers, and knowledge of their victim. The character was actually created by Jim Shooter, who was 13 when he thought of the character. Following an encounter with a strange visitor, however, the Parasite's powers powers were enhanced and enabled him to retain the energy he takes for longer, as well as granting Jones, the next parasite, the ability to shapeshift. He can now physically morph into his victims right down to their DNA, being able to access their memories, gain their natural abilities, and mimic their voice, which I think is pretty damn dangerous. At least it only lasts for a certain length of time though. However, Parasite also absorbs the weaknesses of superpowered individuals, even if someone else he absorbs has an immunity to it. And at 6, Mr. Mxyzptlk. Mxyzptlk possesses reality warping powers with which he enjoys tormenting Superman or just making life difficult because he's like a little sibling. His portrayal has been varied, with him being an outright supervillain in some instances and an anti-hero in others. But in most of Mix's appearances in DC Comics, he can be stopped only by tricking him into saying or spelling his own name backwards, which sends him back to the 5th dimension that he calls home and keeps him there for at least 90 days. That's not even 3 months, bro. Come on. However, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, he was changed to having a new requirement that needed to be met for him to leave. That would change each story, such as Superman getting him to paint his own face blue. So Mix getting Superman to make Mix paint his face blue, like his own face. This is one of the few villains that actually uses Superman's other weakness, magic, against him, since most just resort to kryptonite. This guy has the ability to warp reality and do basically whatever he wants, and since he comes from the 5th dimension, he isn't bound by the laws of 3rd dimensional beings, whatever that means. But bro, what is with your name? I get that it's supposed to be hard to say, so it's hard to say backwards, but come on. Cut a guy some slack. I talk about Five Nights at Freddy's all day. Okay, I don't have room in my brain for this.
And at number 5 is Batman vs. the Hyper Clan. This point is eerily similar to the Manchester Black vs. Superman point on part 2 of Brutal Villain Defeats. In 1997's JLA, helmed by Grant Morrison, a team of superheroes shows up on Earth and begins fixing problems and completely eradicating supervillains, gaining popularity with the people that rivals the Justice League. The difference here is that this team of superheroes are actually white Martians. Unsurprisingly, the first of the Justice League to find this out was Batman himself, who managed to evade being captured unlike the rest of the League. Sneaking into the HyperClan's base, he managed to lure one of their members, a mortal, who he strung up with a little Batarang-held sign that read, "I know your secret." When 3 other members of the HyperClan showed up, Batman brought them down with a single match and a circle of gasoline, turning their one weakness to fire into his greatest ally, because he's Batman. Number 4. Darkseid. Darkseid is not a character you mess with. He's incredibly powerful with an insanely capable mind and the ability to practically never pass away. Sure, we could talk about his defeat at the hands of Batman, but that's kinda boring. Batman's a regular guy, sure, but he's also Batman. What we want to talk about is Volume 3, Issue number 2 and 3 of this comic called Superpowers. This comic was made to go along with a toy line, so we already should slightly suspend our knowledge of what various heroes and villains are actually capable of for right now. Now in the story, Darkseid's Omega effect had been dwindled to almost nothing thanks to Mr. Miracle, Tyr, and Mr. Freeze. After being betrayed by his people, he winds up teleporting to Earth with the last of his energy. Now, covered in a cloak, Darkseid is forced to rob a store just to find more clothes and remain unnoticed. But just after he does so, Darkseid is confronted by a pair of muggers in an alleyway. A pair of regular old human muggers who bully him, threaten him, and then knock him out cold with a chain just to rifle through his pockets and run off into the night. But the best part is how he looks up with a big Darkseid frown and goes, "Oh, surely my plight can sink no lower." You never see Darkseid like this, and certainly not in a fedora and a trench coat. Mwah.
Coming in at number 3, we've got Poison Ivy, one of the villains most associated with Batman, but who may have been hiding her power levels just a little bit. Poison Ivy has always been dead set on protecting the green plant life of the Earth, and especially values it over human life. In a particularly noteworthy case, Poison Ivy was able to mind control essentially the entire human population through their consumption of fruits and vegetables. And while that's definitely some weird comic book logic, Batman was only barely able to defeat her by bringing her into contact with the one human being she cares about the most, Harley Quinn. You gotta love when love saves the day. Coming in at number 2, we have the Batman who laughs. Now, you obviously can't have a Batman villains list without at least somewhat referencing the Joker, but this wild combination of Bruce Wayne and his greatest foe might just give Mr. J a run for his money when it comes to power. In a dark, alternate world where the Joker realizes he's dying and begins a mass killing spree of everyone in Gotham, Batman is forced to finally kill his fated foe. Unfortunately, at the moment of death, Bruce was infected with a special brand of Joker venom that completely flipped his moral compass, but left intact all of his intelligence and planning. All of the chaos of the Joker with the brains of Batman. This supervillain is Batman's worst nightmare come to life, and has only been able to be defeated with the entire help of the Bat family. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have one of the biggest bads in the entire DC Omniverse, Darkseid. The leader of Apocalypse and one of the more feared villains that the Justice League has ever faced, Darkseid is known to even be capable of defeating the usually unstoppable Superman in direct combat. You would think that a normal human being with no superhuman abilities would be completely ineffective against an evil god like Darkseid. However, during the event known as Final Crisis, with the entire fate of the universe at stake, Batman finally broke his no guns rule and fired a bullet of Radion energy into Darkseid's heart, wounding him enough to stop the Final Crisis. And while Batman may have temporarily been believed to be dead due to being hit with Darkseid's Omega beams, it wasn't long before the Dark Knight had returned and proven that even ultimate evil isn't enough to keep him down.